So, something that Steve and I have in common is that we're strong believers in the Oxford comma. Right, Steve?
I love the Oxford comma. I am a big fan.
Yeah, me too. I can't let it go. I've let go of a lot of other older conventions, mostly thanks to HTML and how it handles spaces, but we don't need to get into that.
I used to be a stickler for grammar and spelling and things, and now I'm much more in the camp of grammar should be descriptive rather than proscriptive or prescriptive. Of like language
Yeah,
is evolving, and that's okay. That's good.
I'm glad that you think that about yourself. I think you're still a little bit
Well,
of a grammar nerd, but that's good.
that is
You're
fair, but
you're recovering. You're recovering.
I'm
Yeah.
recovering. I like it.
So I wanted to ask if we have something else in common. Where do you stand on the GIF versus GIF pronunciation?
I'm trying to remember. I think that I say GIF because the first word is a graphics interchange format, and so I say GIF. But I don't entirely remember. I know there was a big kerfuffle about it
Yeah.
years ago on the internet, and it became a divisive issue. But
And I am on the other side of that divide
oh,
as
okay,
a staunch GIF
GIF.
proponent. So,
Okay, like the peanut butter.
like the peanut butter, yes.
All right.
And no, there's not a logical argument like the first word is graphic. No, it's just, I don't know. It's the way I learned it. That's the way I thought it was. And anyway, how about this one? Niche versus niche.
I think I've said it both ways, and I don't know what my internal logic is for either one. Niching. So if it's the gerund, I think I say niching. But if it's the noun, I think I say niche.
Okay, well,
How's
we're going to
that for
have to.
bizarre?
Yeah, no, that is bizarre. Welcome to language, I guess. That's interesting. Well, let's pick one because that's the topic of today's episode. So can we agree on? I'll agree with you. Niche and niching.
Okay, fair enough. We'll split the baby.
Okay, cool.
Dear listener, hello. I am Steve.
And I'm Tyler, and welcome to It's Not About the Money, where we discuss a wide range of topics related to creating and running small businesses.
Tyler and I are small business owners ourselves, just trying to make sense of the world one podcast at a time. And today we are talking about niching. Did I say the right one? Niching.
Niching, or what is your niche?
How do you find a niche?
Right.
Or not?
So I guess my first question is, why are we talking about this as relatively new small business owners?
That is a good question. In the accounting space, at least, my impression so far is that the more profitable clients out there are the ones who are looking for someone with expertise in their particular problems, their particular situation. And so it would be beneficial for me as a sole proprietor to specialize in something that's solving a particular category of problems for a particular kind of client rather than trying to be a generalist that just does taxes for everybody. Because then I'm competing with TurboTax and H&R Block and like a retail franchise, which is not really a game that I want to be in because I'm not looking for low margin tax returns as a side business.
Of the word, no, you're focusing on finding a niche because advantageous to your ability to find the kind of clients that you're looking for specific, therefore have better margins, basically.
That's right. And so I think
Okay.
about this all the time, which is why I suggested the topic,
Yeah.
or which one of us suggested it. But
I think it's a great topic because, as I was preparing to start a business, I was exposed to a lot of content on the internet about how to market yourself, how to find customers, all that kind of stuff. And this is a theme that came up over and over and over again every time marketing or sales. And it was very difficult for me in the beginning because I had no idea what was going to be or who my ideal customer was going to be. And so I would occasionally try and sit down and figure it out, like write out a customer avatar. And it never got very far because I was like, I'm just making this up. I'm just like imagining something and making it up. I've come a long way since then. But anyway, yeah, I think it's one of those things that's very commonly talked about in marketing.
It is, yeah, especially on the marketing side. That's a good point. Because if you are trying to advertise to everybody, then you're competing against every service provider on the planet, including the ones that have higher leverage, like software companies. Yeah. But I want to talk more about this. That for me, trying to find a niche so far has been like I already know that there's certain aspects of taxes that I enjoy more, or there's certain kinds of business owners that I like working with more, and so that has guided me very naturally in this process of discovering where I want to focus. And I think it is an iterative process for me, but it's it was a little more forced of like, well, I don't know who my ideal client is yet. I can you talk more about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a journey and I've changed my mind several times as to what I think about this. So I already described the beginning of the journey, which is I found out about the concept of niching and um, it sounded very logical to me and like a very good idea for a lot of the reasons that you've already mentioned. But when I sat down to actually do it, I don't feel like I had enough experience or knowledge to do it successfully based on like the amount of data that I had at the time, which was nothing, in terms of our potential customers.
Sure.
But as you said, and that was just my first iteration, I tried a few different things. I was like, oh, I'll focus on people like me. So basically, for a while, I was focusing on workers because that's what I am. Um, basically, people with white collar jobs uh, and then I was exposed to a counterpoint to this by a guy by the name of Mark Butler. He's come up once or twice on the podcast so far. Yeah, he's a he's a personal finance coach who has a lot to say about coaching. I think
Yeah.
most of his lead actually kind of high profile, high income coaches, and so he knows a lot about the space of coaching, particularly life coaching and money coaching and things like that. And he feels very strongly that you should not niche down. And I find that interesting. I've had to think a lot about that. And his argument basically is that if you choose a niche up front and then build your marketing and growth and business efforts around that, what if you were wrong and you don't appeal to that niche at all, or you've set up your website with a domain name and chosen a name for your business all based on this idea of a niche, and then it turns out that you need to pivot because that's not working. Like, then what do you do? And I really latched on to that idea for a while, actually, long enough for me to actually not worry about it anymore. So I just, uh, and now though, now that I've had quite a few clients, relative, right? So a dozen or so clients, I'm starting to notice what they have in common. So now I'm kind of coming back around to the idea, which is also something I got from Mark, which is, just do your thing. And this maybe applies to like something like life coaching that's more generic than tax preparation. I'm not sure, but and then let your niche emerge. Right? He's like, you will end up with a niche, but it might be better to let it emerge than to pre-decide what it should be. And so I think that's sort of starting to happen with me. And so that's where I'm at right now. Is I'm starting to come back to the idea of like, yes, I should have a niche, and I'm still at the beginning of the process of understanding what it is and what it looks like, but it's kind of coming together a little bit. And I think it'll continue to iterate and I'll refine it and adjust it and even change it as my business grows, right? I mean, wouldn't it be cool to have a niche of like super wealthy people that want to pay me tons of money because it's just a drop in the bucket of net worth or whatever? Yeah, that'd be great. I'm not there. But yeah, anyway, that's a little summary of my thinking on this topic over the last year.
A lot of sense. I like the idea of letting your niche emerge as you're kind of discovering it. Do you think that Mark's advice is more applicable to coaches than to other sorts of businesses,
I've wondered about that.
or even particular types of coaches, like life coaches versus financial coaches like you are?
Right. Well, I've had to think about this a lot because I didn't want to just take one person's word for this without doing some first principles reasoning as much as I'm capable of or whatever, right? So his audience, I heard this on his podcast, and his audience, I think, was primarily life coaches, which is a more generic term for people who coach people around finding a purpose in their life and setting goals, creating a vision, setting goals, and working towards that vision. It could be anything. And yes, there are lots of life coaches that niche down and get specific, and that's fine. But I think it definitely applies to that when to become life coaches. And even though I don't consider myself a life coach in general, I'm focused on personal finance coaching. It's pretty inevitable that we get into life coaching because money is so
It's tied up in everything.
central to the way that our exactly like it touches almost every part of our lives, right? You could even argue like the non-tangible parts, like our spirituality, our emotions, our mental health, like all these things, not
Yeah.
just our bank accounts. So it's been interesting because that's another way I've changed a little bit. Is at first I was like, nope, we only talk about money. I'm here to help you do a budget and get your finances on track, and that is still what I do. However, I'm always surprised how quickly the conversation becomes, wait for it, not about the money. it's always about something more, something
Yeah.
deeper. So anyway, but yeah, so to answer your question, I do think that applies to his, which is coaches.
So I wonder if the way you describe it, if life coaches like is the niche, like that's as narrow as you need it to be. If that's the space you are in, there's still plenty of.
Do you mean for me and my business personally?
No, it Mark's audience of life coach.
Oh, yeah. I think that's his general audience that he, far along enough and far enough along, and it's he's got into that upper echelon, I guess you could say, of clients in terms of what he's able to charge and what the type that he's able to work with. But I think his hope is that by helping people become successful at life coaching, they will get themselves into that upper echelon through being successful, right? And then be his ideal type of client. I don't want to put words into his mouth. I would just say if I were, that's what I would be doing. So, and it seems to be working out for him as far as I can tell. So,
okay, that makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it really comes down to what kind of business you're trying to do. I can imagine that there are businesses where it's much easier and a simpler process to know what your niche would be. I mean, if you're trying to sell sports equipment for pickleball, I bring that up because that's like a big thing right now where I'm at. I think maybe storming the country, and obviously you're going to be looking to target people who are into sports, who are into pickleball, who are active, or want to be active, that kind of thing. So I don't know. I think it depends, which is an annoying answer. I'm sorry.
Well, I use that answer all the time in accounting, so that's fair.
Maybe, and here's like a little bit of the coach in me coming out here. It's like I would say to someone, what is your business and what do you think your niche is going to be? And if you're having a really hard time figuring that out, like I was, then maybe start with that one and just start talking to people about your business until you start to get a few customers, and then go from there. You will get insights. As long as you have a direction and you're moving forward, you'll figure things out as you go.
I like that idea. Where if it's difficult to articulate the niche, you might be too early in the process to properly discover it, and you just got to get out and do the work for some people for a while, and figure it out, and then it will emerge.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't want to get stuck, right? Like it's easy. Like if all the marketing content on the internet is telling you step one, pick a niche, and you're stuck on that and you never move past that because you never feel like you've defined your niche adequately, then you're just never going to accomplish anything, right? So
Mhm. Good. There's one other concept that I want to discuss with you on this, which is horizontal niches versus vertical niches. And let me explain what
oh
I mean by that.
yeah, tell me about that.
A vertical niche might be in the tax business, for example, I work with restaurant owners, or I only work with coffee shop owners, or something like that, where you have a particular sort of business that they do, and you know that business inside and out, and you only work with that kind of business owner. A horizontal niche might be more like I work with business owners who make between $1 and $5 million a year in revenue. And it doesn't matter so much what the business is, but if they're in that revenue band, then you know some things about their business and their financial needs. And so you can meet them, whatever the business might be. They could be in real estate, they could be doing a restaurant, they could be doing solo web design, whatever it might be. But you can have that kind of a horizontal.
Struggling with it, but that's really interesting because I've heard elements of both horizontal and vertical niches in the literature, I guess, or actually the literature, the YouTube videos. Yeah, that's interesting. So basically, one is situational or circumstantial, I guess. I'm not sure what the right word is there, but based on the size of the revenue or the size and the complexity of the business, regardless of what domain or vertical they're in, right?
Yeah.
Huh. Well, are you picking a certain vertical or horizontal axis here, or are you trying to combine both into like a hyper focused?
At the moment, I think I have a horizontal niche, which is solopreneurs and business owners who have less than like 5 to 10 employees. And because I'm not articulating a particular kind of business or what you do or even how many employees you have, like all of that's kind of in a range. I don't have like a specific revenue range.
Okay, that's interesting.
I
So you don't necessarily care what kind of business these people are in, as long as they're of a certain maturity, I guess you could say.
That's right. And I imagine that will continue to evolve, but that's where I am at right now.
Okay, that's cool. I really like this idea. And I'm trying to think of how I could apply this to myself. I mentioned earlier that I'm starting to see a pattern in what a lot of my clients have in common. Uh, I'm thinking mostly it's a horizontal thing. Like it tends to be an income. It tends to be people who make decent or good money in many cases. So you could compare that to like what size is the business, I suppose, or
Right.
what the maturity of their financials. Well, I won't say the maturity of their financial situation, but their revenue, their income, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing that they all have in common right now is that they have heard of or want to use YNAB, the software,
Right.
which makes sense considering my background and how I got into coaching in the first place through the YNAB certification program. And so, even though I am happy to coach on personal finance in general, whether or not someone wants to use YNAB, so far that's where all my clients are coming from. So I feel like that's definitely a big part of my niche right now is people who have heard of, are already interested in that budgeting software.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing they all have in common is they're not happy with their personal finances, right? Like that, or else we'll be looking for help. So basically, higher income, have heard of YNAB or want to use it, or have tried to use it and failed for whatever reason, and they're just kind of sick of having their finances be out of control. So in short, it tends to be people who make a lot of money, but who don't have much of it left through because it's just out of control. They've either are, and it can come down to like disorganization or all kinds of or like really dramatic life change circumstances like divorce, marriage, graduating, those kinds of
Yeah.
things. So anyway,
There you go. So if I were to summarize what we've discussed so far, I think the salient points are if you're having a hard time articulating your niche, or you just don't know where to start, it might be too early, and so don't let that be a hang up to getting the business going.
Mm-hmm.
You still go out there and get some clients, and if you eventually choose a different niche, that is okay. You can even I even think it's okay to pick a niche and go into it, and then the exercise of doing that, you discover, oh, actually, I don't want to do this. I would rather do this other
Yeah.
thing. That's totally fine too. So that can be a useful exercise. So just that, and then horizontal versus vertical niches. I mean, that could be a false dichotomy, like trying to square it onto one of those axes, because like we discussed, it's kind of both sometimes, but I think it's a useful rubric for thinking about it.
And I think, the vertical niche actually has a lot of power. Like that's why I kind of initially pursued that knowledge worker niche idea because that's what I know. Like I'm used to having a corporate job. I work in an office. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
middle manager. I know that world, right? I have the same struggles and hopes and dreams and like curiosities as other people who are in that situation. So I guess initially my niche was I was thinking is people who are similar to me in a lot of ways, and I think you can create a sense of connection that way. It's like, oh, I know what you're going through, or I understand your situation because I am in that very situation, or I have been through that situation and I've come out the other side, and I can have that experience to draw on. So I don't honestly.
Yeah, agree. You're always hearing about the CPA who only does dentists. At least,
Really?
well, maybe you're not always hearing about that. I'm always hearing
No, I've
about
never
that.
heard of that in my life.
So that's a very common niche for a CPA to focus on. Is like dentists or doctors, or like they have
Yeah.
particular needs, and if you can understand them really well, where you can take care of a dentist from the day they graduate dental school until they hire and sell their practice, and you can follow that whole process, and all this stuff, can be a really powerful uh, role to play as an advisor.
Yeah. And that sounds lucrative too.
Indeed.
You should get on that. I'm just kidding. I actually think it's really cool that you're focusing on solopreneurs because, again, that's what you are, right? You're kind of
Right.
in that niche yourself.
So I kind of
So I think to answer the question of this episode, which is to niche or not to niche, I'm going to go with yes, you should definitely niche. But there's multiple ways to get there, right? Like we talked about, you can either decide beforehand if it's really clear to you and then adjust as you go along, or don't stress about it. Just start and then use your feedback and the experiences that you have to let that niche emerge naturally.
I agree. And the reasons for doing that is you can end up having a more profitable business that is easier to run marketing for, because you know exactly who your customer is, and they can see you as an expert in whatever it is that you do for them.
Yeah, and there's probably a cooling effect as well, right? Like in people who are into the same stuff, know other people who are into the same stuff situations, so they might drop your name or talk about you naturally in conversation. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
okay, you know what? I'm changing. I'm a bit at the end of this episode. I am now a bigger fan of niching than I was at the beginning. I think I'm coming around.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. I'm a fan, so I'm glad I have persuaded you a bit more than you already were.
We'll see how it keeps going for me.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. If you have questions, comments, topic suggestions, you can email us at hello@notaboutmoney.com. And we will see you again on another episode.